Welcome back to our video series on building multi-language reports for Power BI in 2023. We've now reached part 5, creating a workflow to integrate human translations. What's this topic all about? That's a great question, Ted. This topic is all about improving the quality of our translations. Now, machine translations are great because they give us instant gratification. We can instantly test things. But at some point your users are going to have, apologies in advance, rage against the machine translations. So what we need to do is somehow integrate, humans, who aren't Power BI desktop jocks, or, they might not be technical, but they act in the role of translating between different languages. So Translations Builder has this concept of a translation sheet. And, we will start by doing an export operation, which takes, all the translation work, for a single language or for multiple languages, and adds them to a editable file, that we can send out to a human translator. Now, today we support CSV files. It's possible we could support other formats in Translation Builder, in future editions. Now, once we export, there's this idea of the Outbox. So now this is going to be outbound. This is something we're going to send out, to a human translator. And the idea is that human translator will be able to open, up these translation sheets, using something like Microsoft Excel, and, to be able to work through, if we have machine translations, they either need to approve or revise them, or maybe we don't want to use machine translations, so they just, have to come up with all translations from scratch. But the idea is that they'll do this work and they'll return an updated translation sheet. And so the idea is that we have an inbox, which we, look for, the source for our import operations. And the idea is that, once that translator has gone through and updated Spanish translations, we'd be able to import them, which would, then allow us to overwrite all the machine generated translations, with what this, human has decided, would be better choices, for these particular translations into Spanish. Okay, let's get started by quickly reviewing the commands that we have in Translation Builder for export and import. So there are going to be 3 different commands to export translations to generate a translation sheet. So we have different commands because sometimes you want a translation sheet with a single language for a translator. Sometimes you want the master translation sheet. Sometimes you just want to generate all the translation sheets at once. So we'll look at those in a little bit more detail. Note that there is an open in Excel option. So all the export commands, as you generate a translation sheet, we'll attempt to open it in Excel if you have that option checked. So sometimes you want to check, sometimes you don't. And note that there's only one import command. So regardless of whether your translation sheet, is single language or multi-language, the import logic behind import translations, is able to figure that out on the fly. Another thing Translation Builder allows you to do, is to configure the outbox and the inbox with folders on your local hard drive. So this is what you'll do when you go through the lab. You are going through the lab, aren't you? Anyway, I digress. Once you choose configure settings, it's going to bring up the configure settings dialog, which then allows you, to, point to folders on your local hard drive. And the idea is that, then you have one dedicated folder, where you're generating all your translation sheets to send out to translators. And then you have an inbox folder, where all the updated translation sheets, get stored to basically, ease looking for files during import operations. Okay, let's start with the simple scenario. I have a project and I have Spanish translations, and now I need to create a translation sheet to send to a person that knows Spanish, that can, look at my machine translations, revise what needs to be done, and send me back, the updated translation sheet. So to start with, we're going to pick, what is the language, for the translation sheet we will generate. Second, you simply click on the Export Translation Sheet button, and it will produce a file. And note that the file name, if the PBX file is named Product Sales, then the file that gets created is product sales hyphen translations hyphen language, which in this case, is Spanish. Okay, now let me walk through some of the things that you're going to do, in the lab. So there's an exercise, in which you'll test out the export and import operations. So first thing I want to point out is that you can configure settings, and so we have you configure settings, to some folder on your local hard drive. So for instance, if I go back here, I have a Outbox and I have a Inbox, and we always populate the Outbox first because there are outbound files. Now, if we come back here, you can see we have 3 different languages that we could choose from. So for the first one, I'll go ahead, I'll choose Spanish, I'll uncheck that, I'll go ahead, click, and what we should see behind the scenes, is that it generates this translation sheet. Product sales is the name of the P/X file, and then it's always going to be the word translations hyphen, and then it puts in the name of the language. Now let's say that we'll generate one for French as well. And then what we've also done is we've given you this option to open in Excel. So now we'll go to the third one that we need. We need to have German, so let's go ahead. And what you can see is that, after it creates this one, it also opens it in Excel so we can see the contents. Sometimes you just want to kind of grab translations, so quickly opening it and grabbing what you need and then closing down the file. Sometimes, I find myself doing that. Now, let's go ahead and uncheck this, and you've kind of seen, how we're able to create, just the single language translation sheet. We also thought about the scenario where you just want to generate all the single language translation sheets at once. You don't want to have to click a button for the first, another button for the second. So we have the export all translation sheets option. Now, the idea with this, once again, is that with a single button click, you can regenerate, all the translation sheets that need to be sent out to your translators. Let's take a quick look at that. Now let's revisit the scenario. Before you saw that I was able to generate, these 3 translation sheets, each with its own individual export operation. Now here, we're just going to say export all translation sheets, and in most cases you want to disable open export in Excel, and we'll go ahead and click, and what we can see behind the scenes, is that these are automatically generated. Imagine if instead of 3 languages, I had 5 or 10 or 20 or 45 different languages. This button gets to be more appreciated the more languages that you have. Okay, now what you've seen so far is export operations that generate a translation sheet with a single language for translation. Now, sometimes it makes sense to create a translation sheet, that has more than one language and its translations. So there is a export all translations option. And when you go ahead and you use this option, it's going to generate a translation sheet that has a column for the translations of every language. So a master translation sheet can really serve as the backup of all your translations work. As we'll see, it also kind of gives you, some ability to kind of move your work, between projects. Back here, we'll do some more of our lab work. Here I am in Translation Builder. You can see behind my Outbox folder. So at this point, what we're going to do, is we're going to click on the Export All Translations button. And when we do that, we create this, and you can kind of see that we have product sales translations. They all follow that naming pattern. But we have single language files, French, German, and master. One more time, French, German, and Spanish, and then we have the master. So let's go ahead and open this up. And so what we can see here, is the, master translation sheet just gives us, a single file, that has, in this case right here, here's our work, these translations, for these 3 languages. Okay, now we're going to look at some, ways that you can leverage this master translation sheet, over the next couple demonstrations. Okay, now I'm going to step through something similar to what you're going to do in the lab. We have these translations here, And, everything we have so far is, really machine translations. So as a experiment, let's go through this process where I'm going to take two of the translation sheets we've generated, the master and the single language translation sheet for Spanish. I'm going to copy them and I'm going to put them, into the inbox folder. And there's one more thing I'm going to do. I'm going to open up the Spanish translation sheet. And, with this open, what we'll do is we'll, take something such as the, the name of the products table. And I'll do something simple. Waldo was here, so I'm just going to change three of these inside here, but now let's go ahead and save this work. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that you can't import a translation sheet if it's open in Excel. So I've made my changes. I'm going to go ahead and save those changes. Okay, and so this is just kind of simulating. We've just got an updated translation sheet back from one of our translators. So coming back inside here, we kind of look at the current state of the translations. We now say import. We take that translation sheet, and as they import, I can see, Waldo was here. Now, another thing that I want to do, while we're here talking about import, is let's say that, for whatever reason, I let my daughter, come here and freely type in, and then now I've got some problems that I need to kind of restore what I've had. So another thing that's nice is that if you have backed up the master translation sheet, you can import that. And so what we're going to get here, is basically just restoring our entire project to, where it was beforehand. Just going one more step, you're going to run this experiment in the lab. Let's say that you take French and you decide that you don't want French anymore, you remove it, you save the project, and then you say, uh-oh, I didn't mean to do that. So another nice thing about importing the master translation sheet, is that this master translation sheet has the translations for French, but they're not in the current project. And so one of the nice things about the, import operation, is that it will automatically add a secondary language if it's in the translation sheet, but not in the target data set, for your import operation. Okay, now we're going to just look at one more topic before we finish, this particular video. So what we want to talk about is trying to manage translations at the enterprise level. What I don't want to do is I don't want to do all this work on my first PBX project, to basically localize the data set and then have to do all the work on, other projects. So what we're able to do is we can take the translations work that we've done on a particular project and we can back it up by exporting a master translation sheet. And then, by importing that master translation sheet into other projects, I can start moving the translation work that I've done and reuse this work. So let's just kind of look at the logic that's built into the import operation. Well, first of all, let's say that project 1 and project 2, both have a sales table and measures named sales revenue and units sold. So what's going to happen is we're going to be able to kind of move that metadata, from the first project to the second project, so you don't have to redo that work. Now, unlike the first version of Translations Builder, this version will ignore, if there are dataset objects, in the master translation sheet, and when you import them, they don't exist, it just ignores them. Now, what's really nice here is that, and you just saw an example of this, if the master translation sheet, has secondary languages that aren't in the target data set, it just basically adds them, in the column on the fly, which gets to be very nice. And then finally, we treat the localized labels table very specially. And that is when you import a master translation sheet, if there are any localized labels and the target project doesn't have the localized label table, it just creates it on the fly as part of the import operation and then adds all the report labels and their translations, into the target data set. So what we really kind of are looking for, is this enterprise level style of management, where we're kind of able to keep reusable, aspects, inside of, kind of a master or template translation sheet. And the idea is every time I create a new project, I'm able to import, the things, from this template, just to be able to get to a very advanced starting point beyond starting from scratch. Okay, let's look at one more example of, what's possible. Okay, now assume you're working on a project very much like the lab exercise, and you did work on the lab exercise, didn't you? And anyway, what we were able to do is, we were able to take a data model. We were then able to, do the translation work with Translations Builder, and you kind of saw we were able to, export that master translation sheet. So let's say we go through this process of, either my team, or some other team is creating a new project, and let's say we're all kind of using the same data sources. So let's go back to recent sources, and I'll find that products table. And as this comes up inside here, we'll do a quick transform data. And as we do this, we're going to go ahead and choose certain things inside here. So in our case, what we'll do is we will simply take the product and the product image, and at this point I'm going to just kind of make some quick changes, so that we'll call product, this one we will call image, and we'll have the products table. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a similar data set object in this project compared to the project I've just done the work in. So we have products table, image, and product. Okay, great. So now what we're going to do is, as we start Translations Builder, and you can kind of see we have these objects inside, let's go ahead and import translations, and I'm going to import that master translation sheet. And as part of the import process, you see that, for all the dataset objects that matched, I picked up the translations, and I automatically have the localized label table. All the labels got pushed across. So now, following the steps, if I generate the translated localized label table, now I can come over to my report, and let's go ahead and add a card visual, and you can kind of see that my report label translations are good to go. So once again, this whole idea of trying to put as many reusable elements into the master translation sheet, such that you can automatically get them into your new projects, is the whole idea of the enterprise level management style of working with master translation sheets. OMG, are we already done with this section? Man, time flies when you're having fun. Okay, well, let's look forward to our next installment, part 6, in which we'll look at implementing data translations using field parameters. Stay tuned.